Tick tock, tick tock. It's Slick Podcast o'clock.
You have tuned in for a Slick Podcast. I'm here to seek the truth. Live from Scotland around the UK. The one and only Slick Podcast. Enjoy the show. Can I ask important questions? No matter how bizarre the truth might be. Tune in for Slick Podcast. Keeping it real, keeping it groovy.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or a very good day to you when and wherever you're listening from. And a very warm welcome to the show. I'm your host, Simon Laurie King. Coming up on today's show, it's a real treat to have as my guest Cynthia Sue Larson. Cynthia is the best-selling author of 6 books and helps people visualise and access whole new worlds of possibility. Cynthia also hosts Living the Quantum Dream on the Dream Vision 7 radio network. She has been featured on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, Coast to Coast AM and the BBC, and has presented papers at international conferences on science, spirituality and consciousness. Since 1999, Cynthia has shared findings from scientific research in the fields of quantum physics, quantum biology, the placebo effect, positive psychology, sociology, and alternative medicine. Cynthia's articles have appeared in journals ranging from Cosmos and History to Magical Blend to Parabola. Let's stick with that one. And her Reality Shifters website has compiled one of the most extensive collections of reality shift reports in the world. Her popular e-zine, Reality Shifters, is eagerly awaited each month by thousands of subscribers worldwide. Cynthia has a degree in physics from UC Berkeley, an MBA degree, and she's a Doctor of Divinity. Cynthia reminds us to ask in every situation, how good can it get? The unseen and mysterious, unpredictable world of quantum physics is very much a subject that interests me. Without the unpredictable and spooky actions of the smallest of all things, our world would just not exist. I think that in an age we now live, with the strangeness being the new normal, then exploring the effects of shifting reality is totally appropriate. This past year, I've personally witnessed so much weirdness that every morning I wake up and I wonder what more complete what the heck moments will be added to my day. My guest today is more than qualified to explain at a quantum level why the fabric of normality is at best rippling and worst completely falling apart. So without further delay, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Cynthia Sue Larson to the show.
Thank you so much, Simon. It's such a pleasure to be talking with you today.
Likewise. Let's get the ball rolling on this one. Your background is very much an academic one. Could you start off by telling us the beginnings of your interest in science? And was this the catalyst for your interests or observations in reality shifts, or was it earlier?
Well, I've loved nature all my life, and I consider just observing nature to be part of my fascination with reality. That combined with my father's interest in science, I think propelled me. So it was really my family. My mother was a gardener, and so I'd spend much of my time when the weather was nice, and it often is in California. I'd be out in the garden with my mother before I went to school, even when I was quite young. So even from a very early age, I just completely adored nature. I was impressed with the importance of science, thanks to my father talking about it all the time. So I think I was steered, if you will, in that direction of taking a look at science. And then my personal interest had to do with the true nature of reality, because I would observe things that I started to realize other people were not necessarily witnessing or feeling or sensing for some reason.
And you have a degree in physics.
Yes.
That's correct.
From UC Berkeley, yes.
UC Berkeley. So quantum physics, to my understanding, is the study of the very smallest particles, and unlike classical physics, i.e. the study of heavenly bodies and other effects upon objects around us we can see and measure without specialist electron microscopes, etc., quantum physics is the very foundation of all that we perceive. And without its spooky action and irrational behavior, classical physics and all and everything would just not exist. So can you give me an example of the difference between quantum physics and good old predictable classical physics?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for such a beautiful question. Very seldom does someone point out, as you just did, that it really is thanks to quantum physics that it's the foundation of everything. And we would not even have the classical physics without the quantum physics. So thank you. You'd be amazed at how many people miss that very important yet seemingly small detail. So, okay, back to the difference between the two. Basically, most of the physics that we think when we're just going about doing our daily activities, what we think of as normal behavior of an object, such as a cup of coffee, if your cat pushes the cup off of the table and it falls on the floor, then we recognize that's a classical physics situation where the cat applied a little bit of energy to push the coffee cup off the table. So there was a little bit of friction on the table surface. This is classical physics. The cat supplied a little bit of energy. So the cup built up a little bit of velocity and momentum, and its mass determined what happened next. If it was full of coffee, it would be heavier, but it would fall at the same speed everything falls when pushed off the table by the cat, which is definitely classical physics.
Could I just interject there? If nobody's observing the cat pushing off the coffee, does that mean that could be Schrodinger's? I can't even say it. Help me out with the name there, could you? Schrodinger's cat?
It's pronounced. Yeah, a lot of people pronounce it Schrodinger. In German, sometimes it comes out sounding more like Schrödinger.
That would be easier for me to say. Schrodinger's cat. Yeah, because that was a thought experiment, was it? Is the cat alive or is it not alive in the box? I just thought I'd do an attempt at a little joke there, but carry on.
You're right. And it's brilliant. So people who don't know what we're talking about, I'll just summarize quickly. That's a beautiful example of the quantum weirdness. And that was brought up by Erwin Schrödinger, who is a researcher in physics. And he was studying quantum physics and noticing that it seemed to be presenting absolutely absurd possibilities, such as that if nobody's looking at something, maybe nothing's happening, or you don't know what state it's in. So in that example with the cat would be put in a sealed box, which nobody knew what was happening inside the contraption, inside the box. And there's a contraption in there with the cat, which is basically triggered by random triggering device. And that random triggering device is operated thanks to some radioactive decay of an isotope, which nobody knows exactly when it's going to decay or change. And so when that happens, then a triggering device is activated and a little glass vial of poison gas is released inside the box with the cat, which could kill the cat if the poison is released. So there's the experiment. Now, the thing that Erwin Schrödinger said was so ridiculous and preposterous, really, was just this idea that you could bring this very strange idea that at the quantum level, something could be both alive and dead. Well, we don't call it that usually. It would be spin up or spin down. It's much more common description in the quantum realm. And so its state, its wave function state would be one or the other. But there's also in the quantum physics world, this superposition of states, this concept, this idea that you can actually literally be in this sort of smeared all over all possibility state of being. And that's what's crazy, because if you apply that then to the cat, now we've entangled this quantum operating device, that release of the poison gas, with the cat in the box. So that now means if that random situation occurs and the radioactive decay happens, the trigger is triggered, the glass is broken, poison released, and the cat dies. But at the same time, because it's a quantum system, we also know at the same time the radioactive material has not decayed, and that means it has not triggered the device. So that would mean the cat is alive. Therefore, we have this ridiculous situation. This is what Erwin was proposing: is look at how ridiculous this is. What we're saying is that the cat is both alive and dead when we look at the quantum realm and bring the classical realm right in there. because obviously the founding fathers of physics understood at the core, just like you understand, quantum physics is the foundational reality, and these two need to go together, even though quantum physics often looks a little bit surreal, like this idea that something could be up and down or smeared over all possibility, or the cat alive and dead at the same time.
Yes, everything needs a foundation. If we have a building analogy, without a foundation, we just have a pile of rubble. Lots of good intent, but a pile of rubble nonetheless. So, quantum physics, my understanding. So, before we get into the double slit experiment, now I've heard you explain that time and time again. I really like your explanation. Obviously, you're a physicist, but you might roll your eyes and think, "Oh, not really again." But I'm just going to put one out there. So, my understanding of the unpredictable or the spooky action. Just for an example, say a particle would appear to be in the same place simultaneously. Different places simultaneously. I've been thinking about this. Now, you're going to have to correct me if that's an actual thing. The same particle being in different places simultaneously at the same time. So I thought there's only 4 conclusions here. One, it's either 2 particles, not a different particle. It's not a single one, it's 2. Number 2, it's moving so fast you can't actually see it. So it's like a playing card on the spokes of a bicycle. Number 3, misobservation. Or number 4, that's quantum physics for you.
I think I missed the first one. These are very amusing. I love your, you're cracking me up. Especially number 4. That's quantum physics for you.
Well, it just seems that way because could we go on to the double slit experiment, because that really is an enigma. Probably I'm underselling it here.
Yes. Okay, that is this double slit experiment that you're speaking of has, I think it's unanimously been described and received the international recognition, rightly so, for being the most elegant experiment in all of science. That's across all of the sciences, and it's pretty much widely regarded as such. And the reason being that very seldom do you come up with one simple experiment that has so little complexity to it, yet the outcome of this simple apparatus and just retooling the experiment a few different ways can present all kinds of additional information, which has implications for basically every single field of science. So that's by way of introduction. And then what is it exactly? Okay, the double slit experiment was proposed quite a long time ago, like hundreds of years ago. And the idea was that you could investigate to see what happens when you fire one quantum particle, in other words, like one photon at a time, from a little particle beam. And so if you're capable of it's like a flashlight, but instead of, with most flashlights, we're shining around the room or outdoors. That's basically hundreds of thousands or millions of photons blazing away and illuminating the room and the surroundings for us. In this experiment, we just have one photon firing at a time. And before it can hit its final destination, which is an observational screen at the other side of this device, halfway in between is another piece of a very critical piece of the experiment. It is the double slit, which looks like 2 very tall, skinny doorways. And so the little photon being fired, the idea is what will happen when you fire a single photon at the screen. And that's sort of the opening question for the generic experiment. What the findings are remarkable, because what starts happening is, depending on how and where an observer positions an observational device, that absolutely affects the outcome. For example, if you do not put any observational device in either slit, so we don't really know which slit the particle went through, the photon went through, then what is going to happen is we will, as each photon hits the screen at the back, at the last part of the apparatus, it will, one at a time, be creating basically what looks like when you throw pebbles in a pond and you get the ripples that interfere with each other. You'll start to see an interference pattern by firing one photon at a time through those 2 slits. And it looks as if every time you're firing a photon, it's interfering with itself, which means that apparently when you're firing just one photon at a time and you don't have the observational measurements device in either of the slits, then it looks like the photon is traveling in a wave function smeared over all possible probabilities manner. So it's traveling like a wave, it's traveling not like a particle. And this brings up this interesting particle wave duality. And just one quick thing and then we can move on, but this is the basic experiment. The other thing you can do, of course, as I keep mentioning or referring to, is you can put an observational device in either one of the two slits, at which point you will know for sure whether the photon went through one slit or the other. And this is where it really gets interesting, because if you do that, then what you'll observe, instead of the smeared out diffraction pattern of interference patterns, kind of like beautiful zebra stripes on that screen in the back, instead of that, you get something that looks like paintball splats. It's like the photon just hits, like it's a little ball that just hit the particle detection screen at the back. And so you get these little clusters lumped together, no sign whatsoever of those beautiful diffraction wave patterns.
So a photon can act like a particle. The photon particle can act like a particle or act like a wave. What interests me about this, that's clever. Yeah, that's really clever. But what interests me about it is the change in the conclusion of the experiment. And why is observation the key here? Does that mean that the particle is sentient and somehow senses it's being observed? There is something here that is the bit of the experiment that really gets me. Why is there a change in that photon from it being a particle to acting like a wave when being observed? Is it doesn't make, well, that's quantum physics for you. It doesn't make sense, but it's the observation part of it that actually changes from a particle to a wave. So have you any clue what would allow it almost to understand it's being observed, or do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
That's probably the $64,000 question here.
Exactly. Well, we are talking about sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, it's almost like it's almost like it's sentient. It has a feeling of being watched, like we're walking down a path in a forest, and we've got that feeling that we're being watched. We can't see any, so we act differently. We're tense. We keep looking behind us. Maybe a really, really bad analogy here, but that really interests me. Why would it change? Why would the results of the experiment change? Because it's being, how does it, or what is it? Because there's no electricity. There's not like, I mean, we're receiving light in our irises. We're not, as far as I know, giving anything out. So it's not picking up anything that's changing it physically, but on the actual act of observation, it's changing from a particle or acting from a particle into a wave. And that is what is really interesting about this.
It is extremely interesting, and we don't really have the answer to that question. That's where all these different quantum interpretations come into being, each one presenting their own unique solution to this fascinating puzzle to describe not just this one singular outcome from this double slit experiment, but lots of other strange behavior of quantum physics, such as spooky action at a distance is one thing that Albert Einstein referred to, where it seems like not only are these quantum particles aware when we're watching, it's like, how do they know? How do they have consciousness when it's just a tiniest little building block of matter? It's just a singular photon. How can it know? So it seems like consciousness, a lot of the founding fathers of quantum physics, including Max Planck, who coined the word quantum to begin with, he felt that consciousness is fundamental. You cannot get behind consciousness. And that was his go-to on what is going on here. But the various interpretations take a stab at it, try to make it palatable. So far, none of them have been universally accepted, but there are quite a few top runner quantum interpretations, if you will, such as the holographic one and and so forth, Copenhagen interpretation, and the many worlds interpretation. These are three of my personal favorites.
Let's dive straight into reality shifts. What are they?
Yes, that's another $64 million question. Basically, for those of us who have noticed at times that you're in a hurry, you're feeling flustered, it seems like it happens a lot at these times, feeling ungrounded, a little bit rattled, and you need to go. You're trying to just gather your coat, your keys, your phone, your wallet, these basic objects, and one of them goes missing right in that moment when this should not happen at all. And it's most vexing, of course, when you know for sure that you had your keys, for example, right here in this dish that you always keep them in by the door, and now they're gone. And it makes no sense because there's nobody in the house and there's nowhere they could have gone. And so you proceed to spend precious minutes doing a quick search of the entire premises, hoping to find them quickly. And then sometimes you come right back to that front door dish and there they are. And there's nobody else in the house that could have put them there. It's as if they went missing and then decided, well, I've caused enough trouble, here you go. So that would be a classic garden variety reality shift. But essentially, it's any time that we observe things appearing, disappearing, transforming, transporting, or some very bizarre observation of the way events are occurring in time. And that's how I've been defining it now for more than 20 years.
And it's been happening to you since you were a child. In your book, you state that you, as a child anyway, I don't know if this was because of preconceptions. I was talking to Elizabeth Brown yesterday, a master dowser, and she said it's easier to teach children because they've got no preconceived ideas dowsing than it is adults. So as a child, you said in your book, you could almost stop and start the rain. Is that the same sort of thing because of the innocence? You just realise, well, I can do it, and then in the book you go on to say, I went to show my mother, then I couldn't do it again.
Yes, in the book I mentioned this concept of how our beliefs can get in the way, and like you said, children have this naivete, this beginner's mind, which is optimal, as you said, for learning things. Absolutely, because then we don't have the preconceptions, we don't have any pre-existing belief that blocks us from experiencing something that we might otherwise definitely encounter. And so you're right. It really helps to have that open mind, to have that beginner's mind, that openness to embracing whatever might be happening without so much fearfulness or clinging to our expectations of what we think should be happening. Because sometimes nature can have fun with us, is the way I feel about these reality shifts, that it can be entertaining, enjoyable, and refreshing, revitalizing, inspirational, and very good for prosperity even.
Could you give me some examples of reality shifts that have happened to you personally, where you've either made them happen or they've just happened? You've said about your keys, but is there a memorable reality shift that you can call to mind?
Oh, yes. I'm looking at one. I'm just looking at these curtains in my house right now. And very recently, I think just in the last few months, that recently shifted for me. What happened is a number of years ago, maybe 20 years ago, quite a while ago, I made the mistake of washing those silk curtains in apparently warm water. Anyway, long story short, they shrank. And to reinstall them back on the window, I had to actually move the curtain rods. It's suspended between two curtain rods, and it left a very seriously large 1.5-inch gap, which sort of wrecks the whole reason for having a curtain, because now there's a huge hole where I put that gap at the top of the window, but if they're tall enough, they can peer right in the house. And I thought, well, that's unfortunate. Anyway, I didn't think much about it until a couple of months ago. I kept looking at that curtain and sort of being annoyed by it. And my husband was looking at it, feeling annoyed also. And I think he was commenting like, gosh, we should really get a new curtain for that. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, long story short, one day I woke up and I walked into the room and looked at the curtain, and I was disappointed because I saw now it's drooping. Now look at that. It doesn't fit the window at all. It looks like, balloon pants down, just sort of looping around all it's overextending by, gosh, a whole inch and a half, almost 2 inches. And then finally my light bulb went off. Like, oh my goodness, this curtain it's like it's growing overnight. And I had washed it about the week previous, but it was completely dry. There's no reason for it to suddenly be back to its original stature, which it never had been in all the annual washings since the disaster occurred some decades earlier. So that's fascinating.
And in your book, you've mentioned that you've been at conferences and people's names and speakers. So people's names have suddenly disappeared from the list of
Yes.
itinerary, and the speakers are no longer there. Nobody's heard of them. No, they're not here.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was amazing. You're thinking now, you're describing the incident that happened on, I think, Monkey Island. I was there for a conference about, it was about, simulation of computer environments and so forth. And there was an architect that I saw on the program. And I was so excited because this was kind of a little rinky-dink conference. I mean, it's a nice venue, definitely, but it wasn't like attended by anybody of great stature, or so I thought, except for there was someone there from an architectural firm I had heard of in London. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was OVE and then ARUP, Ove Arup. And I still remember that to this day. Offhand, I don't remember the name of the gentleman that I saw on the program, but I know for sure he was there. And we were just taking a coffee break or maybe a lunch break, something like that. At any rate, people stood up, walked away from the tables, and left the room for a little bit. And I got up and stretched, and I suddenly noticed, like, what time will he be speaking? I'd love to make sure I don't miss that. So I'm checking my program, and as I look at it, he's not there. He's not on the program. Or I know for sure he had been, because that was such a big deal to me that we actually, someone from that prestigious firm would be there. But nope, he's gone. And then I turned to my husband at the time and asked, do you remember someone from Ove Arup going to be here? And he did too. We both checked our programs again. And then since very few people were in the room, I jumped up. I thought maybe someone's playing a trick on us. Maybe the real programs are elsewhere. I must have seen someone else's program. So I just peered at different programs laying on the tables around, and none of them had anyone from Ove Arup, and then nobody from Ove Arup showed up that day either. But it's amazing to me that why would I have imagined that? And also my husband too. So we both were witnessing this. Something definitely changed for no apparent reason.
And you've also seen people that apparently have died, and they
yes,
obviously haven't reanimated. But do you want to elaborate on that one?
Oh yes, this I think is the first time that phenomenon has been described in a printed book. Would be the book Reality Shifts that we're talking about, and the personality involved is a celebrity. And he was the actor that was on that TV show Dallas and I Dream of Jeannie. So I don't know if you have. Is he
Larry Hagman?
Well known?
Larry Hagman.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. You know him.
Yeah.
Good.
Not
okay.
personally, but maybe he'll come on the show. We'll be pals.
I'd love it if he was alive again. But
has he died? Has he died again? Isn't he?
Yes, he has. Yes, he has.
How inconsiderate. Carry on. Sorry.
Right. Okay, so what I observed in the 1980s was that I had seen that he had some health problems, certainly, but I had then it came to pass that he died. I witnessed the news. I didn't actually watch him die. I wasn't there. I don't know him personally. I have to say that, of course. What I saw was the usual coverage that any celebrity of that stature receives on the nightly news on television, in the newspaper, magazines, because after all, this was a big deal in America about who shot J.R. Ewing, and he played the character J.R. Ewing in the 80s, so it was kind of a big deal, and now he's dead. Except, I remember all that, except then strangely, he was alive again, and that was weird for me, because then I felt like I'm the only one. I did, at that point this is now the 1990s, and I didn't know how to discuss this with people. Like, it's a weird conversational item. Like, by the way, do you remember that Larry Hagman passed away? And it's just sort of a strange icebreaker. So I didn't really gather a lot of data on that, but I know for sure that I remember he died. And then the next thing I knew, he just had a scary situation occur in the hospital, but he bounced right back, recovered, and he was home and perfectly fine and lived on for a number of years after that, which is great. So it was very, very strange. And then in my personal life, my roommate's cat Ashes, he had been visiting me when I moved across the street to a new apartment, and the cat would walk across this rather busy street, but he was safe about it, or so I thought. Until one day, Catherine informed me that the reason I might notice that Ashes was not visiting me in the garden. I said, "That's right. He's been gone for a while." And she said he was hit by a car and he died. And I was devastated because that felt like that was a cat I'd lived with for years, and he felt like a member of the family. And I had really enjoyed getting to see him in the garden, and now he was gone. But then he came back. It's like it was definitely the same cat. Some people say, well, how do you know? But if you know cats, then there's no mixing up. You just don't confuse one cat for another. Besides, I would say Ashes, and he would come. He knew his name. He just looked a little bit greasier, like he hadn't been washing properly. He didn't seem to have injuries, and I was so grateful that he was back. So I spent lots of time with him every day instead of ever feeling like I'm too busy to pet a cat. No, no, no. I felt like, oh my gosh, he was dead and now he's alive. And I did ask my husband at that time, do you remember this? And he sort of vaguely did remember that. But in the early days of studying this phenomenon, there weren't as many people talking about it as we fortunately have right now.
Cats are getting a pretty raw deal on the show today, aren't they? Because I thought you were going to say you got put in a box and...
Oh, I love cats.
Yeah, cats are absolutely brilliant. We've got two and they're absolutely awesome. I'd like to think they say the same about their humans, but you say in your book, Reality Shifts, that the more we closely observe these personal reality changes happening, then the more they become apparent. Is this then the observer, in your opinion, the observer becoming more entangled on a quantum level? Because I don't want to get away from this quantum because it's so important. So the observer becoming more entangled on a quantum level because of the realization of that observation, of the reality shifts happening.
Right. And that's a brilliant point to make. It's very entirely possible that because when you are expecting that reality shifts will happen, then basically you're setting things up that you'll be more likely to see them. As far as whether that's entangling yourself with those possible outcomes, I would say yes, absolutely. So in the form of consciousness, you're pre-selecting future outcomes that would be of the startling variety. The ones, because I've done that myself, just asking the universe and cosmos, please show me the wide, vast array of all the different types of reality shifts. And that was my request to the cosmos before writing the book Reality Shifts. And at that time, I did not know of the brilliant work of Mary Rose Barrington, who had written, she has a book called Just One of Those Things, or JOTT, J-O-T-T. And she's, I just want to put a shout out there because she, I believe, was in charge of some groups for Society for Psychical Research. Although I don't think she studied the physics side of things, I do want to give her credit. So I'm just going to say that. And then, of course, in Australia, we have a professor in Sydney, Australia, who writes about a disappearing object phenomenon. He calls it DOP. Mary Rose Barrington's work goes back to the early 1900s with a large body of various experiences where things did, as I would say, disappear, reappear, appear, disappear, transform, and transport, that kind of thing. She had different names for this, but essentially very similar. She didn't talk about dead people being alive again so much. But going back to your excellent question, sorry, going circular fashion, back to the question. Yes, when we look at this situation of reality shifts and ask, why is it that we can notice more closely that these things are happening, and then we see more of them, and you were then asking, does this imply that the observer is then becoming more entangled on a quantum level? And yes, you're allowing yourself to experience much more of the quantum wave state of reality, which really we don't witness quite so much when we're locking ourselves into a classical belief system.
It's back to the double slit experiment. That's what that question was based on. So I'd pretty much say the answer would be yes to that. Definitely, the more we would observe something, or maybe that's something observing us, the more it would probably happen, or you're just noticing it. So the butterfly effect analogy, which most people are aware of, is, to me anyway, nature's causality equation. Probability, circumstance, and the unknown. One might even say the universe or the creator. If this is true, does that mean we can tap into or directly influence this equation to our own purpose? So, in other words, can we steer the reality shifts for our own common good? Did that question make any sense to you?
Oh, yes, it makes sense. Absolutely. And this is one of those areas where human pride can get in the way. And so I think there's a caution here. And this is where I bring up my favorite question, which is how good can it get? Really want to emphasize that right here and anytime that people want to start steering things. Because what happens is it's very easy for us humans to think that we have complete grasp of the entire situation. We know exactly what's going to happen. And then, if most people, once you've been around the block and seen things transpire subsequently, we know what happens next. Some unexpected outcome occurs, and this new technology, new device, new contraption, what have you, somehow there was an unforeseen sort of a outcome that occurs. And that is exactly the thing to be aware of. And that's why I totally recommend to steer everything with how good can it get, so that what's about to unfold will be in some way enjoyable, prosperous, healthy, full of love, kindness, compassion, and just every good quality that we recognize. Because it's super important. Otherwise, what can happen? Yes, you can absolutely get a butterfly effect. And I think it's funny you mentioned that example because I think originally the idea was that a butterfly flapping its wings could result in calamitous outcomes elsewhere, that might involve weather patterns changing and crops changing and so forth. And so since we can't see everything that's entangled in complex systems where we've got multiple levels of observers who are causing effects, in other words, there are so many change agents at play that it makes it rather impossible for any one conscious agent, unless they happen to be God, to say with certainty that the outcome they're getting is absolutely the best for all concerned. Usually we humans don't have that level of certainty. So I think we're best advised to be cautious and definitely look out for others. Definitely follow us. I would recommend following a spiritual path and don't do things for short-term easy gain without regard to deeper aspects of what's really going on in every situation.
Well, I think the old saying, "Be careful what you wish for," definitely applies here, and also what you mostly have on your mind, you tend to attract. So that might be involuntarily falling into a reality shift, constantly thinking about being penniless or being sick, or I don't know, not being liked by people. It's almost like you're attracting that. Would you agree with that? That would be involuntarily.
Yeah, it's one of two things could happen. If you're focused obsessively on a topic, then you could be pushing it away, or you could be attracting it. So there are a lot of factors having to do with the way our emotions get involved in interesting ways, and that's where it really helps to have a clear sense of who each of us are, and our identity on many levels of our being, including our subconscious levels, because that seems to be running the show for most of us. That's where our beliefs reside, is in our subconscious mind. And so if we, for example, think that a placebo is going to heal us, and if we really believe it, then it can, and it oftentimes will. And that placebo effect has been building in power and efficacy steadily over the last couple of decades, inexplicably, unless you recognize, oh, this is a thing. What our beliefs, how they steer us is pretty much guiding everything. So I think I'm trying to remember what you were saying there.
Move that.
The question.
I'll pick on to that.
Questions?
I'll pick up on that point you were saying about the placebo effect that would work on most people, let's say, until, again, full circle, they become an observer to the truth. Oh, it isn't actually. It's just a sugar pill. It's again down to observation, isn't it, or the truth. So it's quite profound, quite profound. So I've heard you speak on other shows about the law of attraction not being an appropriate terminology for reality shifts and the mechanism. Certainly the ones instigated by oneself anyway. Why is this?
Well, I think it's incomplete, and it tends to indicate that we are static. There's an implication in the law of attraction that each of us is a static being, and rather than a change agent who's constantly more like a verb than a noun. So if we're verbing through the universe and entangled with everything and relating to everything, that's a very different picture of what's going on than this law of attraction, where we are basically like fishermen throwing our hooks into the water and using the correct expectations and pulling realities to us. Whereas what seems to be happening more likely to me is that our true identity is consciousness, and that in that form of wave state, pure quantum consciousness, we are travelers through a number of various realities. And so to me, that's a much more accurate, complete description of, as bizarre as it sounds, much more descriptive of what's going on, that all these possible realities are out there. And we, just like if you're traveling for the summer, your summer travels and you get to go on holiday, where you go and where your passport is stamped, those are the realities that your consciousness has gone through, usually steered by your subconscious primarily. And then to the degree you can work with levels of yourself, you get better results. So law of attraction has some good aspects to it. I'm not sweeping the whole thing under the rug and saying forget about it, but I'm just saying that that's not the way that I view reality, is not through that I am a static being and I am a fisherman and I'm just pulling realities to me. Instead, I'm much more of a traveler, traveling through, that I am pure energy, I am pure consciousness. And to me, that's the real message of reality shifts.
Excellent. There is a quote quite early on in your book, and it's simple but superbly blunt. And I quote, "Sometimes we know we need to change because we feel a need for something different in our lives. And we recognize if we continue on the way we've been going, we'll end up precisely where we're headed." So on that theme, do you think our intuition lets us know when it's possible or that we should be shifting in reality?
Yes, our intuition is the key. It's you can think of it as right brain thinking. I've recently been doing some YouTube videos about how to shut down that problematic left brain, analytical, overly labeling, structuring side, which tends to get in the way with observing reality shifts and the true nature of consciousness. So yes, intuition is the key indeed, and that gives us that hunch, that feeling that so many people hear about if you hear about some disaster and someone was not on the airplane that blew up because at the last minute they just felt like they can't go, or they broke down into tears for no reason, or some strange thing happened and their intuition just told them, do not get on that plane. So I listen to those hunches myself, but they can also lead us in good ways too, not just to avert complete doom, but also to be exactly at the right place and the right time to meet someone wonderful that you never would have met otherwise, to receive a gift from the cosmos that you wouldn't have been there to see or witness otherwise.
So I'm going to throw a curveball at you and go back to quantum or quanta. At the quantum particle level, the smallest of all things imaginable, simply put, are they alive? Or are they random blocks of matter that are the byproducts of chaos, taking into account that we are all made of energy, and there is really no space between anything. It's all energy, to my understanding. So, are particles alive?
I would say that I agree with Max Planck, the founder of quantum physics, the father of quantum physics, when he said that everything is consciousness. You cannot get behind consciousness. When he says everything, he means everything. He means that little photon, that quantum particle. So to me, that's what it absolutely looks that way. So whether we say it's alive, usually we have biological definitions for living things, which leave the realm of physics. Then you're into biology, and so we have different guidelines for determining whether something's alive or not. Consciousness is different, and thanks to the advent of quantum physics, as you see, the founding fathers of quantum physics pretty much were in agreement that everything is conscious. And so that would include that little building block of matter, these little tiny quantum particles.
So it doesn't leave things to chance. There is I wouldn't say a sentience. I mean, there would be no way at the moment to even begin to gauge that. But it just seems to me that back to the double slit experiment, there must be some sort of awareness. They're not just building blocks, because at some point, I mean, the way they act, they just can't be random blocks from of substance. Do you know where I'm kind of coming with this?
Oh, absolutely. And well, I don't know that most people would agree with the alive part, but when you say conscious, if you just switch that word in, it's pretty much, when you start thinking about what's the main thing about being alive, for myself, I would say it would be consciousness. That would be the main gift of being alive. I mean, there are many gifts of being alive, but chief amongst them has got to be consciousness itself. So yes, absolutely, those quantum particles are conscious.
I think that would define the human disposition, wouldn't it? You get called. I mean, you were called Cynthia Sue Larson by your parents, but who exactly you are, whoever looks out from behind your eyes, that's a totally different thing altogether, isn't it? What exists in our body. We answer to a name that our parents gave us, but what is it exactly inside that looks out from behind our eyes? That's a whole different.
That's the key to life. That's what I would say. So if you say, are they alive? And you say, well, not sure about that, but if they are conscious and that is the key to life, does that count? I'd say it counts quite a bit.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, I think I'll replace that consciousness with alive. Yeah, because what I think alive just donates would just a reaction when that your heart is pumping and your knee flexes if you get hit on a certain part, and you breathe. That's alive. But conscious, that's a whole different thing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so this has been an incredibly weird year for the world. From pandemics, volcanoes, hundreds of panicked satellite launches by all nations for some bizarre reason, public unrest, you name it, it's happened. The Hindu faith would say we are in the Kali Yuga, which isn't, to my understanding, a good place to be, or even great news. Kali the demon, that is, and not the goddess. Therefore, is the current Hindu Yuga a cosmic reality shift to explain the weird happenings above? Is this the ancient equivalent of reality shifting stroke Mandela effect terminology?
Well, yeah, now we're getting into the global effects of reality shifting, and that's where the Mandela effect definitely comes in. Yeah, Mandela effect is a term that would be for collectively recognizing a different reality that we remember differently than the official historical records show. And what I'm noticing with the Mandela effect, and I'm part of something called the International Mandela Effect Conference, and we've got a brand new show that we just recorded, the first season 1, episode 1, the golden timeline. What we're talking about is that even though I would agree with you, it looks like for sure the last year or so has been catastrophic, chaotic, problematic, challenging, feels like a war zone, tough, whatever you want to call it. And each of our experiences has been unique, but we all have shared some degree of trauma actually in this time. But amidst all of that, it's very possible to still see the answer to that question, how good can it get? And what we're noticing is some extinct animals are coming back to life. What we're noticing is there are some changes in the physical body that are actually an improvement for people, such as the kidneys. People remember they used to be in a much more dangerous location in our anatomy where they could easily be punched if you were hit in the lower back. I mean, you can ask any boxer, any martial artist, put your hands where the illegal kidney punch should not be, should not strike you. And they will put their hands where the kidneys used to be because it's still taught that that's it's like why we have this residue, if you will. This false memory is what the skeptics and cynics would call it. However, many of us can see real evidence that what we remember was real, that we were in a reality where we used to urinate blood, for example, if kicked or punched in that dangerous area. But now, good news, on the entire population of the planet, all of the human beings, our kidneys have moved upward into the relative safety of the rib cage. They are much higher than they used to be, therefore much safer. And that illegal kidney punch doesn't make a lot of sense because the kidneys have moved. So that's the kind of thing going on. So I tend to look for the silver lining. Absolutely, are we dealing with this difficult time? Yes. But this crisis is a birth, and we're definitely being reborn in a new level of consciousness where the paranormal can be the new normal.
I'll just have to point out to people that you are, am I right in saying a second degree black belt in Kuk Sul Won? Am
Yes,
I
correct.
pronouncing that
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
Korean martial art. Right. So you used to know where the kidneys are, but you'd probably just give somebody a kick in the face now just for good measure.
I'm not kicking anybody at the moment, but yes. And it's a self-defense martial
No,
art anyway, but
of
yes.
course, absolutely. Like every martial art should be, absolutely. Back to the Mandela effect, because you used to you coined the phrase reality shifts. Is that correct? Back in the 90s, before this Mandela effect took off, that the commonality, everybody's saying it's the Mandela effect, but you were actually looking at this
I was
back
the first
in the 90s.
person to title a book Reality Shifts. Then I found out subsequently that PMH Atwater had titled one of her chapters Reality Shifts in her book Future Memory, and she was absolutely describing the same thing as what I was describing. So there, I would like to give credit to PMH Atwater. She's a near-death experience researcher. Her book Future Memory is absolutely wonderful if you like this topic, much as the work of the other books that I mentioned, Mary Rose Barrington, and then the other book by the author, can't remember his name at the moment, Tony something, but his book is DOP, Disappearing Object Phenomenon, and then Future Memory. These are further reading if people want to read other authors. So please do recognize PMH Atwater was the person to coin that term, reality shifts.
Do you think, I've heard you ask this question before, do you think that the Hadron Collider could be having anything to do with the, air quotes, Mandela effect?
Well, personally, I've witnessed, when I look at the history, like such as what Mary Rose Barrington has beautifully documented going back to the early days of like the turn of the century, 1900. She's got some amazing examples of that. And then I go to indigenous firsthand reports of wisdom keepers around the planet, and also the Tibetan Buddhists. All of them document reality shifts going back hundreds, if not thousands of years, far, far, far beyond any advent of our Large Hadron Collider. Is it possible that it's ramping things up? Well, maybe. But it's just, to me, it's just a player on the stage, and we could unplug it and we'd still have these Mandela effects. We could just destroy it. It would still be happening. It's not going to stop this phenomenon. So, might it be part of it? Perhaps so. But I don't feel that there's any need to shut it down because it's causing changes. These things were happening already. It's only thanks to our internet that we've been able to share information and recognize that, for example, with me and Larry Hagman, back when I noticed Larry Hagman alive again, that was the 1990s, and the internet was not such a big thing. And now it's very easy to go to a number of different websites and share this kind of information and see if anyone else remembers it that way too.
Could you give me a couple more examples of the Mandela effect? What's most people can't get their heads around? Obviously, the Nelson Mandela. Some people remember that he died in prison, and most of us don't. We remember him being the president of South Africa. So that's obviously the most profound one. Could you think of a couple more examples that a lot of people would think? I can think of the Star Wars one, obviously, with
Yes.
Luke and his
Oh my gosh, yes.
Darth
And
Vader.
so I love that you didn't say the line. That's a movie dialogue that some of us, I was in the theater. Yes, exactly. Now it says, "No, I am your father," but that's not the way I remember hearing James Earl Jones's booming voice in the movie theater. I remember him very clearly saying, "Luke, I am your father," because it just gave me chills. Even thinking of it, I get chills. That intonation with that voice and that Luke, it's not the same as no. Not at all, not even slightly. So
No.
yeah, that's a good one. That's a good idea to point out the international ones too. There are quite a few in the movies. If you build it, it used to be they will come. Now apparently it's always been if you build it, he will come. Um,
Oh, really? I didn't realize that was the guy that built the
the movie's
baseball
called
field,
Field of
wasn't it?
Dreams, and
Kevin
absolutely.
Costner, wasn't
What a
it?
great memory. So if you go to that movie and you think, okay, I remember this, and I certainly remember if you build it, they will come. People even say that in America. It's sort of a phrase, if you're talking about like, well, build a website and then they'll come, if you build it, they will come. But if you don't build it, nobody's going to have anything because it won't be there. Um,
Because that is the important one. Because they did come. Now I kind of pride myself. I haven't got a television. We threw that one-eyed monster away years ago, but I do remember that, Phil, and it is because they did come. It wasn't just one guy. They did come. I can remember it. They came out of the long corn. They. I mean, if it was he will come, Kevin Costner would have said, "No, I'm just expecting one person, not all of you." Or am I getting this wrong?
it was through the whole movie now. It's just if you build it, he will come, and it's just bizarre. I mean, it seems odd to me personally. And another one was Star Wars. Star Wars. A lot of these movies have several things that people are noticing. I remember C-3PO always was entirely gold, but now apparently he's always had this silver leg, as if he's been chopped up and put back together badly, which is quite odd. And it didn't just happen in a subsequent. I know there's the episode. The Empire Strikes Back, and he is destroyed, and then Chewbacca, the Wookiee, finds him and carries his parts around and reassembles him. But clearly, he was already kind of messed up before that even happened, and that makes no sense. Like, how could I would have remembered if C-3PO, the robot that's tall and he's the language expert, he used to be all gold. That's how I remember it. And a lot of people would collect. I collected the cartoon books and the little paraphernalia. I didn't buy all the toys, but people do collect the toys, or they said that even their toys now are weird, that now they have the silver leg oftentimes, and that's just wrong. That's not what C-3PO used to look like.
Because the conspiracy part of me, before we began to talk on the show for a good couple of weeks, and I thought, excellent, I get to talk to Cynthia. And I thought maybe this whole Mandela effect. Now, I know you've said it's been going hundreds of years, but I thought maybe it could be the result of these untried and tested, the amount of waveforms we got around now, inducing some sort of dementia. What I meant by that was Wi-Fi, satellite dishes, microwaves. That's really pretty much untried and untested. We are the guinea pigs for that. And I just thought maybe it's that. But as you've said, that it's been going on for hundreds of years, that theory is out the window. Do you know where I was going with that? Maybe it was just this whole global, our brains are being microwaved, so maybe we're all so, and I wasn't making light of dementia, but some sort of misperception induced by this very unnatural state of this high intensive
Yes.
electromagnetism.
Well, that's, I guess you can't rule out that there could be some kind of collective reprogramming going on, but to what end and by whom? And it becomes a very problematic theory in the sense of its complexity. So, I'm not saying that that's not happening, but it doesn't make sense of so many of these other, and like you reminded me too, that this has been going on for years. Mary Rose Barrington has been noticing it. Tony Jinks, that's his last name, from Sydney, Australia, the author of Disappearing Object Phenomenon, and so on and so forth. We've been noticing this for such a long time now. And if there is some field effect from these new technologies, 5G rollout, which it does seem like there should be more precautionary principle, in my opinion, before just rolling this out willy-nilly. Like, what is it doing to nature? I don't know. So I'm not a big fan of just roll out technology no matter what. Definitely not. But having said that, I'm not sure that we can explain away quite everything based on that, and certainly not why so many people are remembering things so differently, and why some of these things, as we are pointing out in the International Mandela Effect community, appear to be showing a very golden timeline, that we're in a golden age for humanity. And when you look at some of those indicators, then it starts looking rather positive. So that's the direction we prefer to look.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, always be an optimist. Yeah, definitely be an optimist. But I was coming through the not the deliberate sending out these signals. I just thought, if you put your head in the microwave, it's going to have detrimental effects. So being living in a world which has never had this much electromagnetic interference, maybe it would have an effect on people's memories. Truly, I thought that, but then obviously you said that it's been happening hundreds of years, then it obviously can't be that then. So if you could give me an example where uh, the Mandela effect, it's just, you just cannot argue it. I mean, the film Star Wars, some people remember it. No, it's always been that way. The kidneys, I'm with you on that one. I always thought if you put your hands, both palms on your left and your right, just above your hips, the kidneys were around there, but obviously not, because I actually, before our interview, I googled it and they're not there anymore, or at least they're not there. Could you give me another profound example of the Mandela effect? Just
Well, they
cannot
can
be
always,
argued.
you're going to find with these things that because there's no, I mean, there's going to be an argument. There will be skeptics, there will be cynics always. So there's no way to to provide such mind blowing evidence that every critic is, you know, sitting down calmly and acknowledging, yes, this is real. It's not likely going to happen. And of course, that's part of the same quantum observation situation, isn't it? When you've got people who are dead set against something and that's what they're expecting to see. And this is backed up by quantum research recently as well, that the observers, you can actually have two observers at the same place, same time, and get two completely different observational outcomes. And this is research that was conducted in 2019, published in 20, it was around 2019 that they did the research, published it, and it was collaboration between University of Edinburgh and also University of Vienna, Austria, and it's a phenomenal experiment, really. But going back to your question, I just want to point that out because people might think like, well, there's proof. When you get to this quantum realm, it's not quite the kind of proof that we're used to because we're in a different logic state. You're dealing with quantum logic when you're in a quantum situation like the Mandela effect. So that's what I would be expecting to see is what we're actually observing with the Mandela effect. Examples for me personally, some of the ones in America would include, it won't mean much to Europeans, but we had something called Stouffer's stovetop stuffing. Now you notice the alliteration, right? Stouffer's stovetop stuffing. Well, that's how I remembered it. Now there's never been any such thing. That we would have it at our holiday meal for Thanksgiving, which used to be the third Thursday in November. Again, alliteration, Stouffer's stovetop stuffing, third Thursday. Well, both of those have changed for me. Those are big for me here in America. And I've heard from people who absolutely feel the way I do about those two. If you have the avocado called Haas avocado in Europe, it's from California where I live, and it used to be spelled always the way I remember, Haas, but now it's always been Hass, Hass, which is very strange, looks wrong. And like I said, I've been born, raised, and lived decades in California, so it's quite strange for me personally. So those ones are big for me. You're going to find Mandela effects are particular to the individual. So if they watch movies, there could be a movie they've seen thousands of times. Maybe they're a big James Bond fan and they love Moonraker, and they swear that when they saw that movie, Jaws, the villain with all of those very sharp metal teeth, had a bizarre love moment where he's looking at a young girl in pigtails and she smiles back at him, and it's this, they instantly feel love for each other. The way many people remember it, including myself, we remember that sort of made sense in a cheesy way because the young woman had braces. And so she's looking at a mouthful of shiny metal teeth. He's looking at a mouthful of shiny metal teeth, and it's love at first sight. Okay, now that she's never had the braces, the character's name is Dolly. And people who have this movie at home, they have a VHS recording or they purchased it or something. It doesn't matter which version it is. You go and watch Moonraker now, if you remember the movie, go to that scene and there will be no braces on Dolly whatsoever. There never were. So that's a big one for moviegoers. But it really depends on, what your field of interest mostly is.
Well, how about one out of a hat, a folk legend, a soldier of the Spanish Empire, Gil Perez, in 1593. I suppose that's quantum jumping. He, you've heard of this one, right?
Yes. Yeah, I get into that example in my book Quantum Jumps, where I describe documented case histories of people who seem to have teleported, and in that case, across the world. In Quantum Jumps, I also describe a couple of young Italian boys that go frequently missing, and so their parents are agonized trying to find the boys. Where are they? And they've gone teleporting again. But in that case, the parents could go round them up, get in a car, and tootle around and find them. But not so with this case of Gil, and he just completely mysteriously appeared. Apparently, there were witnesses that said he had been at his station. He was at a military outpost, and then next thing you know, he's hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, just instantly. I don't think he had a good explanation for how he got there. There's no explanation that could really cover how he could have just been one day in one place. And remember the year, this is long before any kind of aircraft. We didn't have anything that would quickly transport him within even a day, that great a distance. He would have had to go by boat. It would have been a slow, torturous process, and there would have been witnesses that saw him. And there's no way he could have traveled so quickly. So that's definitely, it's in the book Quantum Jumps, but it is a kind of a reality shift, a teleportation, if you will, of an individual. And that's actually a very common reality shift, believe it or not. Not to go that many hundreds of miles. That part's not common. What is very common, surprisingly, is people who are teleported right when they're about to be killed by an oncoming vehicle. That particular scenario is extremely common. When I give talks and presentations, that's where I get the most people talking privately, individually, one-on-one with me afterwards, saying, when you talked about that, I just need to tell you I've never told a soul because nobody's going to believe me, but I was about to be hit. I was in my car on the road, and there's an oncoming car. There's nothing I could do to get away from this huge truck coming right at me. The next thing I know, it's on the other side of my vehicle, as if we passed right through each other. And this happens so often. It's extremely common, and that would be basically quantum tunneling, quantum teleportation happening on a macroscopic scale.
That is incredible. Going back to the, I've just thought of an example actually, because I asked you. I think I've found the one that I asked you. I said, "Oh, can you think of one that nobody can argue with?" And I think I found it. and it's the end of the Queen song when it should say "of the world,"
No.
but it doesn't do that anymore, does it? Everybody knows that. I'm right, aren't I? It does. Well, it doesn't, unfortunately. We are the champions, and then it stops. But it should say "of the
Right.
world," and then the song ends.
Yeah,
Forget
it's
the terrible
very
singing.
nerve-wracking because you're just waiting for it, waiting for it.
Well, my
Oh.
singing's nerve-wracking.
That's so funny. Gosh, yeah, that's a good one. I agree with you about that one. That one got me too. It just doesn't sound right at all. And I think, yeah, and even celebrities
No.
singing along with James Corden would put in the of the world because it sounds right at the end.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. It absolutely does. So, 2012, could that obviously the end of the Mayan calendar, could that have something to do with maybe the acceleration maybe in weirdness? So it wasn't like the end of the world, but certainly the end of an era of less strangeness
Yes,
than there is to come.
that's quite possibly so. And a lot of the indigenous wisdom keepers around the world have told us that this was coming. It was foretold. It was predicted that this was a time. And I've written about it for the magazine Parabola. That an article called "Comes True: Being Hoped For," where I combined quantum physics with native indigenous what's called storytelling. But to me, it was quite real. That the Hopi Indians believe that they believe in something called Tunatia or Tunatiava, which means comes true, being hoped for. And it's such a quantum physics concept. It's really this idea that when you keep something in your heart and in your mind, that these things can manifest. You can, if the way I see it, our consciousness travels, and we are consciousness, and there we are. We're in that reality. They needed that ability to be able to grow their crops clearly, because of the difficult terrain that they're currently living on. The Hopi and many indigenous nations are dealing with similar situations. But going back to this big idea, yeah, it's absolutely this. We're in a very interesting time right now. It has been predicted, and some people, such as the Swedish physicist Carl Kalleman, have written a book, the Ninth Wave, describing that these wave functions, if you will, are speeding things up to such a level that now every 2 weeks things are changing, and you can actually look at the world news and see this happening. So it's not such a stretch to say that his theory is off base at all. No, it looks like it's quite correct. So, and I think that's worth checking out. He's got he also has a blog, and he's got on the internet. There's a place you can look up the ninth wave and see where the cycle is, and there are a number of other waves functions going together too. His book goes into the detail about how each of them correspond to various time frames of human history, and how they have presented humans with different challenges. And clearly, this one right now is the ultimate challenge. So that's why we're noticing that there's so much chaos that you pointed out, and also a great deal of opportunity.
So this ninth wave, where does it stem from?
Okay,
And why is it the ninth? I mean, I'm
yeah,
guessing there's been 8 others, but
okay. When you
what's
look
there?
at, the Mayan pyramids have these stair step, sort of a level to them. So it's kind of like, when you talk about a quantum jump, then it's not exactly a smooth transition, but you see a stair step going on. So if you look at the actual Mayan pyramid, and you imagine that you can see one with 9 steps going up to the top, the Mayans would call that, they would actually draw a serpent in the waves, showing how that quantum, very pointy, sharp delineation going up that ramp is actually a serpent. And so they would draw that right in there. The 9 different levels correspond with 9 different wave functions. And so Carl Kalleman has devoted his life's work to showing how this works out. So he'd be the best one to describe it. And that book is brilliant, The Ninth Wave. So it goes into this better than I can describe it. But essentially, what's happening through history is we started off kind of slow. It's sort of like if you're listening to a nice, peaceful classical song, like William Tell Overture. It starts out very pastoral. You feel like everything's lovely, the Garden of Eden, and so forth. So that's your first wave, and it's all very smooth sailing. It's the lowest level, and then you go up to the next level, and that covers another period of human history. These get faster. The wave length is shortening as you go up. So, as I said, the book to read would be Carl Kellerman's Ninth Wave. But it's quite extraordinary because as you go up this, then all of the waves are working together. So when you're on the second level, you've got the first wave plus the second wave. At the third step, you're now dealing with 3 of the waves. On the fourth, you've got 4 of the waves. And it's all pretty manageable. It starts really heating up, I think, around the 5th or 6th wave. And then human history is full of wars and excitement and so forth. And then, Carl Kalman does his best to show, various things happening in history and some of the themes that are occurring. And I'm struck by the amazing synchronization between some of these things, like the last 400 years. We've witnessed in the Western world a very strong bias toward left brain thinking, Western science, and using our rational minds. But now we need to go back to intuition. And you can really see this when you're going through this theory of the waves and also how it applies to the Mayan civilization and what's going on right now.
Intuition, you could also describe from maybe using the A field, the Akashic records,
Yes.
knowing something. So, if we're talking about these waves, something maybe or just has occurred to me. If we're talking thousands of years, that these waves have got progressively more stronger. Am I right so
Yes.
far? Okay, so if you that obviously means you've got more and more population, which means you have more and more individual consciousness, which means you have more and more individual realities, both trying to bring into and falling into. So it basically chaos. So the more consciousness, individual consciousness that you have, maybe that amplifies this wave. So if we were to, I'm trying to think how many people are in the world now. Right, is it 65 billion? No. How many people are in the world, Cynthia?
I think this is another. It's another
Okay,
Mandela.
let's just say
I remember
billions
it used to
then.
be 7 billion, and then it jumped, and then I don't know what it is right now. That's been a Mandela effect for me.
Well,
Yeah.
you see where I'm going with this. So if consciousness affects reality, and then if you say you went back 100,000 or 200,000 years ago, you wouldn't have a fifth of the people on the planet, aka that amount of consciousness. But now you've got, let's say, 7 billion individual conscious entities on the planet, all trying to forge their own reality. Maybe the ninth wave is being amplified through that amount of chaos through the wow, my brain's actually hurting here. Do you know where I'm
Yeah, but the
going?
good news is, thanks to the Mandela effect, and like I said, what we're doing with the International Mandela Effect Conference is guiding people to think positively, choose timelines that are positive, choose the golden timeline, bring back extinct animals if that feels like the right thing to do. There's so much good that we can do right now. We can work together collaboratively. We can recognize destructive timelines for what they are, and we can pull together in that how good can it get mindset, really with the best interest for all concerned, not some selfish self-interest, but really pulling together in the best possible way.
Well, I hope so, because there's the year that's been 2020 up until now, 2021. It's been horrendous. So let's just put out for positiveness. Well, that is us at the top of the hour, Cynthia. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you come onto the show, and I appreciate you giving us your time today. I hope you've enjoyed your time here also, and I'd hope you consider maybe coming back sometime. Could you tell my listeners where they can find you and where they can find your books?
The best
please?
place to find me is my website, which is realityshifters.com. And from there, please sign up for my free monthly newsletter that would contain information about recent and the newest podcast releases, as well as events that I've been talking about, such as with the International Mandela Effect Conference and any workshops I'm doing and talks and so forth. And the Dream Vision 7 radio network is the host and sponsor of my podcast, Living the Quantum Dream. So you can just type in Dream Vision 7 radio network. And again, the title of my podcast is Living the Quantum Dream. And if you've subscribed to my newsletter through my website, which is realityshifters.com, then you'll be getting notification when each new episode comes out. But all of the interviews are archived. I do interview scientists. Some of them are the fathers of some of these quantum interpretations we've been talking about, such as physicist John Kramer, talking about his transactional interpretation. And I speak with some of the quantum biologists, such as John Joe McFadden and other pioneers in quantum consciousness today.
Fantastic. Cynthia Sue Larson, thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
And that was the Cynthia Sue Larson interview. Although I really enjoyed our conversation today, my brain is hurting with the subject matter. Oh, and yes, I did it again with the mispronouncing of the words Schrodring. I'm not even going to bother. To name but one. At some point I hope to get through a show without mispronounced words. Chink chink, here's to that. My apologies also for blabbing on and on about the act of observation in the double slit experiment, aka my brain ache. This conversation was completely awesome and it kind of blew me away, and I found myself falling down a huge rabbit hole at times. I appreciate the time Cynthia gave us today and also for her patience with my incessant babbling. Dear listeners, I greatly appreciate your time also, and I hope you've enjoyed the show today as much as I have making it. Feel free to leave a comment or like and share and subscribe if you'd be so kind. If you have a story to tell or just want to say hello, then drop me an email. The slkpodcast@gmail.com, but please keep them kind. You can find Cynthia as well as all of her excellent books at realityshifters.com, and don't forget her podcast and radio show dreamvision7radio.com, Living the Quantum Dream. And so my friends, it's time for me to go. Until next time, when I have the pleasure of your company once more, be happy, stay safe, bye.
Slick Podcast. Keeping it real and always keeping it groovy.